Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some band lab clips.
Now for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out. Kind of.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I
spot.
didn't even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes you just, it was just meant to be that way.
Well, hello, my friend.
Hello, hello. And how are you doing
Hey.
on this Thursday?
Hopefully, I'm going to be doing good. I've got a blizzard, a nor'easter going on outside, so fingers
Oh,
crossed.
after snow after Easter.
Well, and it's like two snowstorms. One is going down, big,
Hmm.
fluffy, and the other one's going sideways, like
Oof.
crazy rain.
Hmm. Well, that's no good.
Yeah,
Well, hopefully you keep connected.
not what you expect in April.
No, that's for sure. It's quite lovely here, I must say.
But I'm glad everything stuck through because
Mhm.
we're finally, classical night is here.
That's right. It's been a long time coming. We've talked about it a
Yeah.
few times, and there'll be more than one. So don't worry. This isn't the last
Oh,
chance at classical.
there's gonna have to be more than one because I had to pull some out from this one because the list got big fast. This was not a
Hmm.
hard one to find videos for, and
Hmm.
man, I swear I could do hours just on Nari Soul's channel.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Yep. Especially for
she,
classical. Yeah.
yeah, she filled like so many gaps, things that I was looking for. She's
Hmm.
one of the best resources for classical music research and, you know, knowledge.
Hmm.
I couldn't just pick one. So special shout out to her tonight. Like
Nice.
half of the list is like her wisdom, her
Mhm.
knowledge. Um, she's going to help us get our classical on.
Nice. Yeah, she's got some great stuff. I mean, I've seen probably a couple of the ones that we're going to be looking at tonight, but there's probably some fresh ones too, because I don't know that I've seen all of her classical videos. So
Well, the
nice.
ones that I loved the most, she has a whole bunch of different in a series of like how to play like
Hmm.
this composer, how to play like
Yes,
that composer.
those are some
I
of my favorites. Yeah.
I wanted to put them all in here tonight, but I was like, okay,
Hmm.
we're gonna pick two. One that I know is very close to you, and one that's very
Hmm.
close to me.
Nice. There you go. And again, it's about the way she approaches it, but also just the way that she's able to communicate so effectively what makes it sound like that composer by just
Yeah,
whether it's flashing things up on screen, the way she put the whole thing together, all of that just comes together really well.
and she has real good insight into those particular composers' techniques. Like she explains why this composer stood out because of
Mhm.
the way that they wrote, the way that they played. There's different reasons why composers stand out.
Exactly.
Let's
Exactly.
take a let's take a look at what we have in the lineup. A couple freshie channels. The first one
Mhm.
is a freshie, and I thought this was a good place to start when it comes to you know those who might be new to classical music, wondering like how to appreciate it,
Mhm.
not just like shrug it off like, no, 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 I like rock and roll or I like pop. Classical music has a lot to offer fans of these genres.
Exactly. Classical is great. And again, it's where I started. I mean, I started with classical on the piano and kind of fell off of it, but in my music appreciation in general over the years after that, I think the classical beginnings were very helpful in both understanding scales and arpeggios and the way things come together. Not that I really looked at music that analytically back then, but I think now that I look back at the music, I'm able to drop things into categories a lot more easily and pick things up very quickly because of that beginning with classical and having that foundation. So it's a
Yeah,
good place to start for sure.
yeah. When my first appreciation was for rock and roll and ABBA,
Hmm.
but
Sure.
the moment I started playing, like my love for classical music,
Hmm.
soon as I got a keyboard, I was like, I want to play Beethoven. Like
Hmm.
I
Nice.
wasn't thinking like, Led Zeppelin. I was thinking Beethoven.
Hmm. Yeah, which is great. A lot of
So
great composers to look at.
Lifehacker, very cool channel that I actually watch a lot of on my other YouTube,
Hmm.
and glad that we found something that we could bring in for this. This is the kind of channel where it's it's all about different life hacks, like, you
Mhm.
know, little tricks to get over like depression, or, you know, changing your mood. It really is about like life hacking.
And some of those channels, it's also about efficiency, you know, getting more done in a day, things like that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And then we're gonna the first of Nari, and
Nice.
this is a good warm up. This is the first video you showed me of
Mhm.
hers, and it's the reason why I keep going back to her channel, because she does an analysis of emotion in classical music, and
Mhm.
how classical music really does have a lot of emotion in it that gets tied in certain ways. And as you can see from the composers up there, which composers really
Mhm.
had certain emotions.
Oh, sure. Some of them are definitive for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So she does a little emotion mapping here,
Nice.
and that's going to be at Nari Soul.
Mhm.
And I wanted to include this one to kind of show the instruments back then that were, you know, dominant. I mean, piano is obvious. Like,
Yeah.
piano really dominated in classical music, but the entire orchestra and the development of the orchestra came from what was being written.
Mhm. And also,
And
as I've done more as a sound guy over time, like my ear hears orchestral music differently than I used to. Like it used to just be, it's just all, you know, one thing. But now my ear can say, oh, those are the violins and those are this. Like you'll be able to go to different parts and listen to what they're actually doing. So I get a different appreciation for it once I started to be able to pick apart music kind of in my head.
yeah, yeah, that's the beauty of once you start to appreciate it, you really start to see the effectiveness of like the strings or the brasses, and how they complement each other in this giant arrangement.
Exactly.
And that one's in Freshy channel, the musicologist.
Nice.
Very cool sounding channel, huh?
I like it.
Same with this one. This is one that we actually visited before, but perfect video to kind of wind down the introduction into classical music, which
Mhm.
is going through the different periods. And to be honest, I, there's certain I have gaps in here. Like,
Mhm.
there's certain periods that I'm not as fluent in as others.
Right. Yeah,
So,
the earliest two periods listed there are ones that we did in a music appreciation class that I remember doing in college. We definitely focused on the Baroque period a lot.
yeah, well, the Baroque period was I swear I spent almost 2 decades just on the Baroque period.
Yep.
Yeah, that one's going to be coming from Enjoy Classical Music.
Hmm.
The
Nice.
name says it all.
Absolutely.
That's what we're talking about tonight.
Exactly.
Oh, and this one was real interesting to me because, you know, when you look at titles for classical pieces, it's not like modern day where you just see a title, and
Mhm.
the title might explain something about the song or what the song's about, but you don't really see information about like what key, or, you know, whether it's a sonata or an opus. And um, this video is going to kind of explain what's in a classical title and
Mhm.
why they're titled the way that they are.
Right. And I do love that they tell you what key they're in right off the bat for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a 2-4 for Enjoy Classical Music, because that channel's that good with the
Mhm.
classical stuff. So another
Nice.
shout out there. This channel managed to make it in twice tonight.
Very cool.
But then we go back to Nari for the rest of the night. She dominates the second half of the show
A
with
dominant second half.
yeah, the finale. And with these, we get more into some of the challenges of playing classical music and simulating it. And uh, this one stood out as I was her different tutorials and videos.
Mhm.
Why improving is so difficult for classically trained musicians. And
Mhm.
you know, she mentioned it's not like a global statement. It's not to say that everybody who learned with
Mhm.
classical to start has a problem with improving, but
Right.
it's a common problem.
Yeah,
And
it's a common enough story, just even in general. Like everybody who I know who was more serious classically was not an improviser, and talked about the fact that they lamented the fact that they were not improvisationally, savvy. Like they could do
yeah,
classical. Like if it's on the paper, they can learn it, they can do it, no problem. But if it's not on the paper, they have trouble figuring out what needs to be played, and I get that for sure.
yeah. I related with it because improv has always been
Mhm.
a struggle for me, and
Mhm.
I always wondered if I had started with jazz first and
Mhm.
then went to classical, if that would have been better for me than starting with classical, because I've always had a tough time with jazz.
I will say jazz is a tough place for anyone to start. Really, it's really one of the most advanced in my book, schools of music, essentially, where anybody would be best off starting somewhere else, and even going one place or a couple places first. Like I like the fact that classical kind of laid the foundation. When I looked at the blues, when I first bought my bass, I got into the blues, and that got me just into a very simple structure, and I was able to explore what you're going to do with a bass in a blues progression, and get that kind of baked in there, and then branch out from there to back to doing keys and guitar and all of that. But it's about one of those things that it kind of all has to come together. If you were to start on jazz when you don't know music at all, or you're just going to start out, okay, I'm going to do jazz starting today, that's a really steep hill to climb.
And it also depends what instrument you're starting with,
For sure, yeah, yeah.
because like as a pianist,
Mhm.
starting with classical or starting with jazz,
Mhm.
very different
Mhm.
piano techniques
Yeah.
to start with. So like you said, it's probably better that I started with classical, because jazz
Mhm.
might have scared me away. Like
Sure.
it's such a complicated genre to really wrap your head around. So
One.
ironically, we did a jazz night before we
Yeah.
did a classical night.
And I was going to say, one of the videos might have been the jazz night. It might have just been a random night. We did one of the videos about jazz, talking about, like, when you're starting in jazz, start with these, and it was 5 or 10 songs, standards to start with. And the idea being that, number one, these are songs that are so common that they would come up all the time in a jazz setting. Like if you walked into a jazz jam, there's a good chance that some of or most of those songs are going to come up, because they're so common and so standard that everybody does them. But also because in the order that they went, they were trying to teach little nuggets about jazz. Like you're going to hear
Yeah,
this 2-5-1 turnaround all the time. So here's a song that focuses on that. And then, different elements that you're going to hear in jazz. Each of these songs really kind of hones in on one of them, so that by the end of, if you learn those 10 and you get proficient with them, you really do have a pretty good toolbox to start out with. Because I mean, jazz has a whole lot coming, but that's a great place to start and get get things in the toolbox that you can then break out and use and recognize when you hear them in other songs, to make it
yeah,
easier to learn.
yeah. And speaking of good songs, common songs to learn from, the next one,
Mm-hmm.
we
Oh, yeah.
saw part one of this.
Mm-hmm.
We actually covered that in another episode, and it was such a popular video that she ended up making a part two,
Nice.
variations off of Autumn Leaves. A
Mm-hmm.
good piece to
Mm-hmm.
show. What she's going to show here, which is the styles of different composers. You can see all these composers here.
Mm-hmm.
She's going to show Autumn Leaves in each one of their styles. So, same song, but
Mm-hmm.
approached with the techniques of the different composers. And it really is a good example to see like how the different composers would play the same piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of my favorites of her, the styles of videos that she does, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't wait to see part two. I
Mm-hmm.
loved part one.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And to finish off,
Oh.
like I said, I love her videos of how to sound like this composer. They're so informative, and I was like, okay, Glenn's not gonna argue if I pick
Nope.
Chopin.
No argument at all. My dad's
Chopin,
favorite, one of my favorites for sure.
yeah, probably the most referenced of the composers that we mentioned constantly.
Exactly. It all comes back.
So we're going to take a look at how to play like Chopin, and then to finish it off, one of my all-time favorites,
Nice.
J.S. Bach. I mean, one of the kings.
Excellent.
So we're going to get to really see, like how these composers did what they did, and what made them stand out.
Exactly. But first, we're going to learn about listening and appreciating.
Well, yes, we have to learn to appreciate in order to appreciate.
Exactly.
And this one's coming from, I believe it's at Lifehacker.
I think that's right. Yep.
Yep, at Lifehacker. Oh, he got the good at name.
Nice.
Yeah, and like I said, this is a great overall channel just for, dealing with life and how to kind of hack your way through some of the situations. And if you don't know how to roll a joint, he's got a tutorial on it.
That's good too. Good to know.
Well, it's funny, because we've been looking at psychology of music, and we even looked at a couple weeks ago the medicinal, the uses of marijuana in music. So,
yep, true.
I will be coming back here, Lifehacker, because I can't roll a joint. So maybe you'll teach me.
That's why you have a machine to roll a cigarette.
It does a better job than I do. But here we're going to learn to appreciate classical music and where to start. Like what would be some good music to start with to begin to appreciate what classical music is.
Let us begin.
Classical music. It gets a bad rap. That's mostly just because people aren't familiar with it. I mean, you can immediately tell the difference between Kanye and Madonna, but if I ask you, who wrote better operas, Verdi or Wagner, you might be completely lost. I mean, I was. I'm Nick Douglas, and I too want to appreciate classical music more, but it can be hard to know where to start, so I'm here to ease your apprehension and help you find classical music that you'll actually love. Contemporary pop music has it easy because we can appreciate most of it with little to no effort. The forms and the genres we're used to hearing are highly consistent in structure and tone, so we're all familiar with verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. Understanding and appreciating classical music starts the same way. It's about understanding structure, context, and the trends, and having a healthy dose of patience. First, some vocab will help. Songs have lyrics. Pieces are just music. Pieces can be songs, but saying pieces will help you sound a lot smarter. Most classical music is cataloged using opus numbers. Opus is just Latin for work, and it's noted with an OP. Some composers have specific catalog systems named after the people who invented them. Mozart's works use KV, Bach uses BWV. So when you see Chopin, Opus 9, number 2, Nocturne in E flat, that means it's Chopin's 9th cataloged work, the second movement in that work. The piece is a nocturne, which is like a genre, a piece typically invoking a nighttime mood. And the key, or foundational scale of the piece, is E flat major. Now, none of this makes it easier to remember some of these very long titles. Naming pieces didn't catch on until much later, and many of the names we associate with famous pieces like Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata were just nicknames given by fans. The credit specifically for that one goes to 19th century music critic Ludwig Rellstab.
The opening movement invokes a boat visiting, by moonlight, the primitive landscapes of Lake Lucerne.
If you can't remember which opus is which, use your imagination and assign your own memorable titles to your favorite pieces. It'll give you a more personal connection to the music and will help you articulate what kinds of moods and images you're hearing. We have to talk in broad strokes because we have over 600 years of music to cover, but in general, there are 5 periods of classical music: medieval, Baroque, classical, romantic, and modern. Unless you're into Gregorian chants, we could skip over medieval music for now. The most useful place to start is with the granddaddy himself, Johann Sebastian Bach, or Bach Sr., or the master of fugues. Cool, so what's a fugue? Simply put, it's a music structure that was most popular in the early 1700s, and composers like Bach wrote hundreds of these to show off, experiment, and to have fun. It's a very technical staple of music. It can be very mathematical and formula-driven, so it really helps to know the formula. By and large, a fugue sounds like this. First, a musical subject is introduced. Then other voices echo the subject. Then there's an exploration section that develops on the subject more broadly. Until we return to the subject in the recapitulation, the recap. When you listen to a fugue, decipher what the subject is, since the point of a fugue is to weave that musical idea into as many different combinations as possible. It might not be apparent on the first listening, so be ready to keep things on repeat. Understanding the structure and intention behind classical music makes appreciating and enjoying it so much easier. So tune into your imagination and settle in for some mind-bending music. And check out our Lifehacker Spotify playlist for a starter pack of excellent Baroque pieces.
Oh, he got a Baroque playlist on Spotify. I'm there, dude.
I definitely recognize the Chopin piece is definitely one of the ones that floated around the house with Dad playing the piano.
Yeah, and
One of the ones I played for sure.
the little fugue that he showed from Bach, that's one of my all-time favorite Bach pieces, fugues. I actually did a cover of that and kind of metaled it up a little bit. Maybe at the end, if I can dig it up, we'll take a listen to that at the end.
Nice.
It's heavy.
The visualizer that they had going there, I don't know if you noticed that, but it had following the different voices. So following, like there was like a blue following one voice, red was following another, and orange was following a third, and the timing was like floating between all of them. So it's like everything is kind of very hectic. If you're trying to learn that piece, you don't just jump in both hands and go. I mean, that's the kind of thing where you have to work out, this hand, work out that hand, and work out the timing between the two and all that, because things are definitely not all right on the lines where you would expect them to be timing wise.
That was always the trickiest thing when I was trying to learn any Bach piece was your left hand can be doing things that normally you might be doing on your right hand. You have to become fluid on both hands in order to pull off Bach.
Exactly.
You almost have to have two brains because like one has to be focused on the main melody and the other half of your brain is focusing on the counterpoint.
Exactly. That's another place where totally separate style, but ragtime piano, like the timing to get the timing of ragtime piano is another one of those things that's very much you've got to have both hands really in tune with each other and be able to kind of separate in your head and do this with this hand and that with that hand completely separately.
Yeah. And I like his point of use your imagination. If you really want to appreciate classical music, imagination really helps you to, because you have to fill in. There's no words, you fill in certain things, moods, what the song's really about, what it makes you feel. That comes from inside.
Yeah, go for the journey.
Yeah, and I was surprised to hear that Beethoven did not name it Moonlight Sonata, that it got named in the, what did he say, in the 1800s?
I think it was the 1800s, he said, yeah.
No kidding. That's new to me.
Exactly. But the fact that they all have the official names, and then certain of them have that that quality to them, like with a bumblebee. I mean, that's something different. But each there's different pieces that have some kind of a name that just kind of sticks with them, like they said, that are given by the fans at some point throughout history.
Well, and it goes to show you how, like, nowadays names matter nowadays in music a lot more. And he touched on a few things that we'll see in our later video about what's in a name.
Hmm.
So
Sounds good.
that was that Lifehacker. Nice introduction into appreciating.
Thought I heard that.
Yeah, my headset.
Hmm.
Got to get a new one.
Sounds good now, though.
So now that we've got an introduction into appreciating classical music, we're going to go to one of the best classical music appreciators on the internet, Nari Soul.
Oh, yeah.
Huge fan.
Yeah.
That's all I can really say. The best way to describe, I am a huge fan of
Yep.
her channel. She's on multiple channels. She really like gives herself to the music world all over the place. PBS has a channel with some of her videos, but at Nari Soul, this is my favorite YouTube channel of all of them.
Lots of great stuff there, and her playing is amazing. I mean, just the technique is incredible as well.
And she doesn't just do classical, but she does she does look at it from a classical perspective, because that's the world that she came from, and it's always interesting to see how she interprets all music.
Yeah, and she's definitely the analysis that she does, and again, the way she's able to break down the different styles, and in this case, the different emotions, and map them to different things. It's definitely worth checking out for sure.
Yeah, and actually, this video, the 3 Tiny Habits That Cured My Laziness, that's one I'm going to be going to watch afterwards, because that is part of the struggle of songwriting. Is you feel motivated when you're not at the instrument, and then when you get to the instrument, it's like
Well, that's why like my instruments are always like right there within arm's reach. So if I have, if I wanted to play, it's just like I reach over and I grab it and I start playing. So it's
Well,
there's
and
no barriers, minimal barrier to getting.
you're lucky in the sense that you force yourself to play almost nightly with those open mics and jamming with everybody. So it keeps you on your musical toes.
Exactly. And we don't always know what we're going to play when we go up there. And, sometimes you go up there and get thrown in with somebody else and you're just going to play a style that you never even played before. And that's fine too. That's even better, because then you're just all seeing, how it feels to just jump in and play with musicians that you don't know, which is a good thing.
You don't have a problem with improv.
No. I mean, I still do. If somebody says, "Hey, take a solo," I'm always like, "Oh man!" Like I would have loved to have known I was going to take a solo in this song before we got here, and I would have thought about it beforehand and really gotten, because I'm so focused on the bass parts that I'm usually doing, that when I switch over to a guitar roll, even just doing rhythm guitar, like I've started to play rhythm guitar at some of the jams now, and just that is such a it's not my job to keep the time anymore. So like partly it is like I have to stay on time and all, but I don't have to always be on the one. Like the rhythm guitar can skip the one entirely and just come in with some chirp chords afterwards. So it's very easy to hear like, oh, they hit that note. Okay, I'm over here then, and I can get a reference point without being late, because rhythm guitar doesn't have to be on, on the one every time like you do with the bass.
Yeah, it's the solo improv that I think is the hardest improv.
But just following along with anything that someone's going to start playing, that's easy. Like to me, like as soon as it starts, as long as it's a song that really does have some kind of a structure that goes around, it could be complicated structure. It could be, a 4 or 5 chord, whatever. It could be a part A, part B, whatever. But once I hear how it kind of comes together and I can jump on board to the way it's repeating, I can, just, oh yeah, this is the part where it went to there. Yeah, okay, I remember that now. But if you start telling me a list at the beginning, if you just start saying, okay, it's going to be G and C and D, and then the other part's going to be, E, and then like if you start listing it as a bunch of letters, like I kind of glaze over after the second one, and like I'd rather hear it like as it comes around, like just play once through the actual changes so I can hear how it comes around, and then I'll be able to identify it more easily.
Yeah, it's like, don't tell me what I'm eating, let me eat it.
Yeah, there you go. I'll use that next time.
Yeah,
I like it.
So Nari's going to show us how to listen to classical music, which is a lot like appreciating it, but associating moods to it. And these composers you see here, she's going to map them out to different emotions and associate them.
Moods and emotions.
It's a great exercise.
Definitely.
Marisol, I'm a pianist composer, and in this video I'm going to take 10 famous pieces of music and match them with 10 different emotions based on how the music makes me feel. Each emotion will increase in complexity from 1 to 10, with the last one being almost impossible to describe. First composer is Scott Joplin, and the piece is The Entertainer. We're gonna start off with one of the simplest emotions that we all feel, joy. If you just hear the left hand alone, it's already very jolly. Also, this is what we call a major scale, and this is commonly associated with happier sounding music compared to something that is a bit sadder. The next composer is Antonio Vivaldi. The piece is Summer from his Four Seasons, specifically the third movement. And this represents to me anger. In contrast to the Joplin, this is in a minor key, and you really hear the distress in the music, especially with all of the repeated notes. These downward scales are also climbing up. And of course, the direction changes and these scales go upwards, and all of this build into this commotion that really gives me the feeling of unrest. The next composer is Frédéric Chopin, and the piece is Nocturne in C# minor. And this one represents sadness. There's a sense of longing in this piece because the melody really lingers on. These intervals going high up, there's a lot of pain in there. It almost pulls on your chest. By just changing one note from the E to the E sharp, we have a brighter sound. What's incredible is that music can change from one emotion to the next, just with one small detail. The next composer is Richard Strauss, and the piece is Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This represents triumph. This music is a fanfare, and with the brass, it conveys a feeling of anticipation, grandiosity, and also with the timpani, there's something very tribal about it. It takes a while for us to even know if we're going to a major key or a minor key, because this still is unclear. And then we have both, a major chord and a minor chord together, and so this creates a bit of suspense and a lot of excitement. And after all of that, it's so incredibly satisfying to get to the final resolution here. Before we move on to the next composer, I want to mention that I'm at the Elbphilharmonie, one of the world's most reputable concert halls, and I am lucky to be their first creator in residence. So throughout the season, I'll be presenting a lot of videos both on this channel and their channel, covering a wide variety of topics. To start off, I wanted to talk about emotions because this is really the most important thing that we experience when we listen to music, whether it's live at a concert hall or at home. You really don't need anything else. You don't need to know the context of the music. It doesn't matter what genre you're listening to. Emotions is the main thing that leads the experience.
But the great thing about emotion is it's a great language that speaks differently to everybody in the room. The composer might have something on his mind why he wrote this music in a certain way, and it will be completely different for you, and still it will be a huge and rich experience.
The next composer is Franz Schubert, and the piece is Erlkönig, or Earl King. This represents terror. Just with the octaves alone, you feel an incredible amount of tension and anxiety. In this case, we have the text to refer to, and it's based on a poem by Goethe, which is about a boy and his father riding on a horse while the boy is being overtaken by a supernatural being and he eventually dies. This is very scary, spooky, and very disturbing. The next composer is Aaron Copland, and the piece is Appalachian Spring. This represents hope. This is one of my favorite pieces, and it really made sense to me when I was on a road trip across the country, across the United States, and I was listening to this music in the car while seeing the landscape of Middle America. What's neat about this piece is that it's constantly changing between bustling music that's really energetic, fast, and really exciting, and then it switches gears and all of a sudden you have these long sustained notes and you're just suspended. And this is when I think the emotions of feeling hopeful and sort of in awe gets amplified. The next composer is Johann Sebastian Bach, and the piece is Chaconne from his Violin Partita No. 2. This represents agony. Right from the beginning, this piece starts off with a grand gesture that is so poised, so bold, yet at the same time reserved, and that's where I feel a sense of pain underneath everything and just the courage to maintain posture with agony underneath, with desperation and also acceptance. The next composer is Samuel Barber, and the piece is Adagio for strings. And this represents devastation. A lot of these phrases, they start with a tied note. So this to me adds this sort of swelling inside where you're not really able to fully express something or fully have a sense of resolution or a sense of grounding. I find that this emotion is very complex. It's not just dark and sad, but it is very warm and enveloping, yet there's a sense of grieving in there, almost a hopelessness. And when the piece reaches a climax, it becomes extremely violent. And I find that to be very powerful. The next composer is Erik Satie, and the piece is Nocien No. 1. This represents numbness. This music is very surreal in the sense that you're feeling a mixture of emotions and they conflict with each other, and some maybe aren't even real. Maybe you feel at ease and it's peaceful, yet there's something uncomfortable and disturbing in the air. What gives this music a sense of mystery has to do with what scale Satie uses, which is based off of the Dorian mode. So if we have the Dorian mode, by raising the fourth, to me it adds a sense of mystery and a sense of something disturbing in the air. Now the last composer is Arvo Pärt, and the piece is Fratres. This represents conviction. I don't know how to describe this. It's restricted, yet free, yet there's a sense of purpose. think the fragility of it is so felt, yet it's so powerful, and there's this unmovable force. It's cold, yet so giving, and during the space, the silence in the music, I think that's when a lot of the emotions sort of come up. And every time I listen to this music, it really brings me inward, and I think this is a great example of where words really fail. It just makes much more sense to close your eyes and listen to this music. Circling back to what I said earlier, everyone will have a different experience while listening to the same piece of music. And so I'd be curious to know in the comments how you would describe some of the music from this list. Please subscribe if you haven't already, also to Elbphilharmonie, so that you are up to date with the videos that will roll out this season. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh, you will see us in not the next, but in a couple more.
We will find you again, yes.
Oh,
Excellent.
and Satie went Dorian on us in that one, huh?
Yeah, some Dorian Sharp 4 going on there. I like that.
Yeah,
Now, for me,
well,
anytime I'm...
every one of her choices there were great. She picked the best ones to map to those emotions. Her analysis of the emotions, I totally agree. Like, I
Oh, yeah.
feel the exact same things she does when I hear those pieces.
The one I didn't have, not a, of course, everyone's subjective, going to have their own opinion of what it sounded like. But instead of anger in that one, I was thinking a tempest, like tempestuous.
Oh,
Like
the Vivaldi piece. Yeah,
yeah,
the
yeah.
spring piece.
I think it was summertime, or was it spring? It could have been, yeah. Whichever one. It sounded more like a storm, the kind of chaotic, that kind of thing. Not necessarily anger, but definitely chaotic and I guess tempestuous. Like, there's a storm, like very stormy was the
Well,
the
and
thought process.
anger would be one of those emotions that different listeners might interpret anger in classical music slightly different. Like
Sure.
Beethoven's Fifth sounds angry to me,
Yeah.
but
There's a lot of these,
it
yeah.
also sounds triumphant. So, like, sometimes I might listen to it and feel like it's triumphant, and other times I'm listening like, damn, Beethoven was pissed off.
Yep. It all depends what you're hearing. And like you said, everybody hears something a little different. So
Yeah, and sometimes it's tied to your mood at that moment. So the beauty with classical music, your mood will affect your interpretation of it.
absolutely.
A
Always
lot
great
like
stuff.
a lot like modern music. Sometimes if you're happy and you listen to a sad song, you might not pick up on the sadness of the song.
It certainly wouldn't bring me down. That's the one thing, is that, hearing a sad song when I'm happy, I would just get maybe nostalgic rather than sad. But like, with some people, they'll hear a happy song and it'll bring them from sadness to happiness. That'll happen. Like if I am, down or whatever, and I hear certain songs, like it doesn't matter what mood I'm in, I hear certain songs and I am just immediately like right in it, happy. I got a good mood going on like right away. And a lot of times it's the upbeat songs, stuff that's in G, is a good guess, G major. But,
Well,
depends on the style too.
were you not surprised at the difference of da, 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 dun, da, dun, da, dun, when it was played in C major? Does not sound happy.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing, is the way she is able to demonstrate those things, the way she's able to take a piece that was written in minor, for example, and translate it to major, which doesn't, it doesn't sound like it would be a big deal, but like to me, that's, that would be a project, to try to figure all that out. And she just, boom, right there. And you can hear the immediate difference, how there's so much more, like you said, sadness going on with the minor and so much more brightness or happiness going on with the major.
Yeah. That is a great introduction into appreciating classical music. These two videos really do cover, like, how to listen and find the emotion in the music.
Yeah, and how important that is, for sure.
Oh, I think it's super important with classical music, more so than, modern music. You got a lot more freedom with words, and people interpret words sometimes more than they interpret the music these days. But back then, the music spoke for itself.
Yeah. And listen with your heart. I guess that's one way to look at it. So you hear the emotion.
Glenn went Roxette on us.
Because that way you can get the emotions out of it.
So that's at Nari Soul, and we will be back for the second half of the evening to look at more of her videos.
Mm-hmm.
But watching those different orchestral clips there as she was playing them, the different instruments that you saw there, and I've really come to appreciate where like the different instruments lend themselves to the orchestral sound.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. How they fit together.
Especially things like the woodwinds and like brass. These are ones that when I was young, it all just kind of sounded like one to me, like the sound of an orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've developed more of my ear over the years, I really am like focusing on what the brass is doing, what the winds are doing, how they're doing them against each other, and the conversation that goes on in the orchestra.
Yep. And just in music in general being played by more than one person. Like even that, like you mentioned, the open jams that I go to, a lot of the open jams, I'm just sitting back and I'm just watching, looking at one person and then the other throughout the band and seeing, honing in on what that person is doing. Like I can see the hands moving, so I can tell, okay, that one's chunking the rhythm right there. That one, I can see him doing the solo right there. Like you can immediately break those things out and see, focus on which person's doing what, which level I would be changing if I was the sound guy. Like, oh, I'd bring that guy way down and I would bring this way up just so that they would be balanced out better. All those kinds of things like just kind of jump out at me. And same thing when I'm watching, a band on TV or watching a video, for example, just watching, and you can kind of home in on there's two guitar players and you're trying to figure out who's doing what, and you can kind of home in on the hands and see what your brain is able to separate from that just by seeing what they're doing.
Yeah, and it can be tricky with just 3 or 4 people in a band.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine what it's like when you have a whole orchestra of musicians?
Exactly.
Fortunately, they tend to be very trained. Like they can put that sheet music in front of them and do their parts, and they all just come together. The conductor helps glue them.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are some of the VSTs that also helped a lot with understanding how the pieces of the orchestra come together. Like, here's your violin section, here's your this, and like where they're placed in the room compared to the conductor. And you can get into all of that as far as the, the relationship of where everything is in the room so that the sounds, how they arrive at the conductor, because the things like the timpani is going to be way in the back, right over there. Yeah. And then you've got somebody who's right up front. So the conductor's going to hear them at different times. So they have to, they have to compensate for that in their timing.
Yeah, and that's something I've been studying a lot more of, like orchestral instrument placing to help me with my orchestral mixing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And VSTs like that can help, but being familiar with what's going on there is also very important. So we should educate ourselves on the instruments of the orchestra.
Yeah. Well, an orchestra night would be a good compliment.
Sure.
So our next video, we're going to look at the instruments of the orchestra, and it's coming from at the musicologist. Free education for all. Hey, that's the spirit. Oh, and look at these videos he's got here. I mean, this is another one who goes and studies. This is a little different than what you'll find on a lot of YouTube channels. Going after things like articulation. I love it. That's something that a lot of them don't talk about and should.
Mm-hmm. The unspoken language, articulation.
Yeah. And I needed a good video to help explain the instruments of the orchestra, and it's in the title.
I like it. Let's check it out.
Yeah, let's become musicologists. Oh,
I love those.
they saved one of the best for last with the piano.
Indeed. Love them.
And I learned something. You are a contrabassoon. If you were an instrument, you are a contrabassoon. or a
Gotta get down.
tuba.
Yeah. My cousin played tuba when he was young, you know?
Well, seeing all those different instruments, I'd have a tough time picking like my favorite or one instrument that I would say like stands out in the orchestral sound. They all lend different flavors to what an orchestra is. Like they started with the Beethoven Fifth as the transition music as they were showing them, and that's a great piece because throughout the entire symphony, you get to hear like all those different instruments at different moments showing themselves off.
Yeah. And you got to love all those sounds. And again, just the dedication that every one of those people playing those instruments, if you have a live orchestra there, just think about every one of those instruments that you see in that huge plot. Like that's another person who has dedicated their time to learning that piece for that one that one little section. So they might even have like huge areas of the song where they don't play, and
Yeah,
then
well,
they have to know come in at the right spot when it's time.
you got to give props to like the triangle and even the timpanis and certain instruments where they're just holding, waiting
Yeah,
for
43 measures of rest, and then
that 1 minute I get to hit the triangle.
or boom, 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 boom. So you need to be in the right spot for that for sure.
Oh, and I'd love to have a timpani setup like they have in the orchestra. Like, not just surround me with timpanis. I'll go nuts.
Exactly. Get like some 4-stick stuff going on, like.
But I'll tell you, as I'm getting more into the different instruments there, I'm really finding an appreciation for the some of the winds, the bassoon, the English horn, the French horn,
Mhm.
the sounds that like they create. so useful and so underused, especially these days.
Mhm.
Back then they really did a good job of incorporating them. The composers back then, really wrote for all the instruments, but you don't hear like good French horns or English horns in modern music as much as I feel you should. Like I
Mhm.
can think of some Pink Floyd songs where
Sure.
like the use of the horns really gave it, like made the song.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the thing is it is a very distinct kind of a sound, and once you hear it, it's like, oh yeah, once you're able to pick that out in a song, all of a sudden you'll hear it other places that you necessarily might not have thought about it before. You might have thought, oh, I thought that was a guitar line or whatever. Some people don't really think a lot about what instrument is playing the line that they're listening to.
When I hear them, for me it's like regal. I feel like
Mhm.
I'm hearing music from the king,
Mhm.
like at the palace.
Sure. I mean, right now I have strings on it, but where would like you're saying the English horn and the French horn? I really do like the sound that they like. This would be the English horn. And this keyboard is very, it sounds very electric, but there's usually more breath to it. But it does have that, kind of regal sound. The bassoon.
Yeah, the bassoon works great if you're making like music for cartoons and things like that.
Yep.
It's very animated.
And even the clarinet for the faster parts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the clarinet and the different kinds of flutes, that's another one that I'm hoping to master one day. Like they're very tricky. They're very tricky instruments to incorporate into modern pieces.
Mm-hmm. And is it more the register, or it kind of just jumps out of nowhere and that kind of thing?
Well, a lot of them, they're on the higher end,
Mm-hmm.
and depending on what else you have going on, like high pitched instruments sometimes can get hard to work with.
Yeah.
The
I,
lower the lower pitched winds, not so, I don't have a tough time with the lower ones, but the high ones,
Mhm.
getting the right part for them, that's where the like solo improvising and things like that would come.
Mhm. Yeah. Very cool.
So now we know the instruments that are in this music.
Mm-hmm. We're sticking with the same channel now, right?
Yes, this is a 2/4. Oh, no. Actually, the next two. This was
Gotcha.
at the musicologist
Mhm.
over on YouTube, and the next two, we're going to look at the different periods of classical music. Start, and this one's coming from at Enjoy Classical Music 6006,
Nice.
a channel that we found last year, and
Mm-hmm.
love my orchestral music.
Mm-hmm. Always.
And look, he gets into when we have a win night. I promise you, this one is going in there.
We'll be back.
Percussion,
Mm-hmm.
percussion, strings,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Breaking it down. Yep.
strings. I would say if I could only pick one section of the orchestra, if
Mhm.
you forced me to, I'd go with the string quartet.
Yeah.
And the instruments involved in a string quartet have become my favorite sounds. The cello I've really come to love like a child.
Nice.
and the viola complements it, and the contrabass under it, and then violins. Those would be my, if I could only write with a chunk of the orchestra, that's where I would go.
Nice. I have a video for you for later for it's a string, it's either a quartet or a quintet playing with Trey Anastasia from Fish. And they do like a whole show of stuff. It's good.
With the quintets, what do they just basically add a second violin, right?
I think in this case it was Trey's on the guitar. So I'm trying to remember now if it was a quartet or a quintet before adding him. So it's him on the guitar and then the rest of the group there. We'll check it out later. I'll have to remember the name of the the group that was either the quartet or the quintet, before the addition of Trey joining in.
Well, you won't have to twist my arm.
Yeah, no, you'll like it.
So
I like
we're going to look at the 5 periods of classical music that we've experienced, and modern is still being defined. I mean, it really is not as old as some of these other ones.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
But
and it's good to be able to categorize where everything's coming from and see how the progression went from one to the next.
Yeah, in the timeline, because like I said, I've got gaps here. There's certain ones that I'm very familiar with, and there's others where I didn't even place them in this order. If this is the order in the timeline, I always thought Baroque was the beginning, but the Age of Renaissance, I think, kicked it off.
Yeah. We'll have to find out what the definitions are.
Yeah, let's see what Enjoy Classical Music says.
Right.
Divides quite neatly into 5 periods, each one a reaction against the previous. As so often when dealing with culture, our story begins in the Renaissance. Out from the monasteries and churches, and also the taverns, comes a new sound. The major key had finally been discovered by Western music. Now, for the first time, names other than anonymous emerged from the murk of history. Individual composers exploring this new sonic landscape. Innovations in crafting and metalwork add instruments to what had previously been mostly vocal music. And yet, this is the wild west of classical music, a place of stunning beauty and lawless harmony. Masters of the age are Palestrina and then Monteverdi, who practically invents opera, as well as plenty more. All that harmonic exploration changes with the Baroque age, which codifies new rules of harmony and tuning. Now instruments can play together in 24 keys, 12 major and 12 minor, at the same time. Composers discover if they double up a violin, they produce a rounder sound. Musical ensembles grow. The orchestra becomes a thing. This is a prolific age, an outpouring of music of unmatched energy lapped up by a new audience. For this was now the age of public concerts as much as the private pleasures of kings and princes. This is the world of Vivaldi, Handel, and of course J.S. Bach. This is the age of the bigwigs. But tastes change once more. Where Baroque music delighted in complexity and detail, the new classical style emerges like a spring clean. Wig sizes shrink. Musical instruments are decluttered. Harmony is simplified with a dominance of the perfect fifth. And melody takes centre stage as complex forms like the fugue are cleaned out in an organisation of music into established genres and forms like the Alberti bass, the string quartet, the symphony orchestra and the sonata form. Music is now nourishment for the mind. This is, after all, the Enlightenment. This is the age of Haydn and Mozart. This is the classical large C age of classic small c classical small c music. But fashions change once more, and that eternal need not to sound like Dad's music meant yet another revolution. Romantic music emerges into the 19th century. If the classical age appealed to the head, the Romantic age appeals to the heart. Composers start to struggle against the forms and genres of music established in the classical age, a struggle you can hear in the music of the legend that straddles these 2 periods. Beethoven's music still obeys the classical forms, but pushes them to the limit. Quartets with 7 movements, enlarged orchestras, symphonies with singers. Everything's getting bigger, longer, louder. The Romantic age emerges with the smell of gunpowder in the air. This is the age of revolution and new nationalism. Composers mine their native folk music for inspiration. Dvorak the Czech, Mussorgsky the Russian, Grieg the Norwegian. Dvorak moves to America and culturally appropriates, very appropriately. The age fully emerges with the composers Richard Wagner and Johann Brahms. There's a silly argument between the supporters of these giants. It's an argument that looks ridiculous with the hindsight of history. The music of Brahms and Wagner sound much more similar than the music of what's about to come. Welcome to the roller coaster of history that is the 20th century. However you date it, philosophy, Science, Cubism, World War I, there is a total new perspective that begins with this new century. In music, the harmonic system isn't just challenged, the movement known as atonalism attempts to destroy it altogether, which, if you ask me, honestly didn't need destroying. Russian composers are on fire in the 20th century, much as their homeland often seems to be. Stravinsky, Prokofiev and Shostakovich offer a discordant tone without going full atonal, although Stravinsky has a go. These composers produced the soundtrack of the first half of the 20th century, a derelict landscape full of death and bereft of a god. Over in America, things were much more optimistic. With Irving Berlin, Cole Porter and George Gershwin revitalising the song and helping deliver a new form of opera, the musical.
Life is alright in America, if you're all white in America.
So, there you go. 5 periods, each of which reacts against the previous to offer vastly different sonic landscapes and unending pleasure for our ears. Please like and subscribe.
Nice. Breaking it down nice and quick. Right through the ages.
Yeah, that's a great synopsis. As he was going through the different ages, I was thinking like you could be describing the evolution of like rock and roll and the different going from like the old school rock to metal to heavy metal, just in a much more faster changing of periods. But when you look at like these different ages, what instigates the next age, it's interesting to see how like going from the beginning where there weren't as many instruments, and then as new instruments came into the fold in the orchestra, going into Baroque, and then as Bach defined like structure the way he did, shifting into classical, and then you saw the influence of certain composers who are like preludes to the next age.
Mm-hmm. And the thing is, I don't even know if the ages are, they probably were not well defined at the time. It's more in retrospect. Like as we look back over hundreds of years, it's like, okay, we can say from here to here is a nice kind of slice where it all kind of goes together. And then something shifted, not necessarily immediately, but over, this period, it shifted and became this, so there's some overlap in the periods, of course, but
it's much easier to describe the timeline for way back then now, like 500 years later, than pinpointing modern is one that there's a lot of debate as to like when did it officially start, and some people consider Stravinsky like the father of modern orchestration. Although I'd have to go a little earlier, where you started to see 20th century approach to the composition.
Exactly. And that's exactly right, Uni. Thinking about it as C major and A minor, like I always look to the piano and think about C major or A minor if I wanted to translate something, or if I wanted to look at something in Dorian, like we were talking about before. We said Dorian sharp 4. So my first thought is to look at the piano and think about D Dorian, because D Dorian would be from the D to the D, all white notes. And then Dorian sharp 4 would just be 1, 2, 3, and just sharp that G. So it's like, it's a good way to just kind of see what you would need to do to make it, Dorian sharp 4, and then be able to translate that to a different key if I wanted to play it in a different key that was easier, for example.
Yeah, if you start with the easy key to understand the length of the notes, the distance, then go after the key that you're trying to play in. In most cases, I will start with C and figure it out before I go trying to do it in any other key.
Yeah, and if you have a melody idea, just hammering it out as, for example, if you're thinking diatonic melody, C major or A minor, or the pentatonics for C major and A minor. But if I wanted to do pentatonics, my first thought would be to go to the black notes, because then I can just do G flat major pentatonic, which is just all the black notes starting at the G flat. Or I would do E flat minor pentatonic, starting same notes but starting on the E flat, and just think about it from there. And like if I had a melody that I came up with in my head, something like that, I could just translate it from there to whatever other key I wanted to do it in. But now I've got that the melody, the intervals of that melody in my ears, so that if I go to that other key, I'll hear if I hit something as a wrong note much more easily. So it makes it easier to go, oh no, not that one, and I can just find my way to the right notes to get it more easily that way.
And Glenn is an official spokesman of the pentatonics.
Yes, for sure. Pentatonics are amazing. Great for figuring out melodies and just, getting a quick idea and all that kind of stuff, and figuring out where you are, and you can embellish to make it diatonic after the fact. Or chromatic, get real fancy.
Yeah. I'm having fun with chromatic approaches.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So that was a nice summoning up of the different classical ages. And for the second one from Enjoy Classical Music, we're going to get a little more of an explanation of why music is titled, classical music is titled the way that it is. And, as we saw earlier, they didn't really focus on names of songs back then. That was not as important as it is today. And understanding the pieces that you're looking at and what they mean to the composer's collection of works, this is going to help to kind of clear some of that up.
And just in looking at that one right there, Opus 68, 68th body of work. I mean, that's a lot of work, because that's number 6 in the 68th body of work. So,
well, we are talking about Beethoven, so he was a proficient son of a bitch.
yeah, definitely a prolific producer for sure.
Yeah. And I love that piece.
Mm-hmm. Symphony number 6 in F major. But what's in a title? Let's find out.
Yeah.
What's a title worth? That bump at the end of the piece, the small print, those numbers and letters, they contain useful information. Now, I've been focusing on Beethoven's 6th Symphony, so let's start there. Full title: Beethoven Pastoral Symphony No. 6 in F major, Op. 68. First part, composer's name, Beethoven Ludwig van Easy. Next, the genre of music. This tells you the type of music you're going to hear, in this case a symphony. The symphony is a work featuring a whole orchestra playing together. A concerto stars a solo instrument or instruments playing with or against an orchestra. The sonata features a solo instrument, sometimes accompanied by piano. Quartet, 4 instruments, a string quartet, 4 stringed instruments. You get the idea. The genre is giving us a lot of information about the music that's coming. Next to the genre is usually a number, which tells you something. This is Beethoven's 6th Symphony. Here is Haydn's 106th Symphony. What does that tell you? Haydn wrote lots of symphonies. Beethoven, bless, never quite made it to double figures. Now, with this particular number comes a particular nickname, the Pastoral. I think of these nicknames the same way I do for royalty. It either means you're good, or bad. With music, it tends to just mean you're good. A name, an epithet sticks because it's used a lot, so it's a sign that a particular piece of music may have an importance beyond simply its numerical number. For example, Haydn's Symphony 104 has a nickname, the London. Haydn actually composed 12 symphonies in London, but the moniker, the London, is a hint that this one, in my honest opinion, is the best of them. Beethoven's 9th is known as the choral because they're singing in it, and his 3rd, the Eroica, that's the heroic, after Napoleon, and, well, there's another whole video there. Anyway, you would assume that gets a nickname. Well, it does in Germany, where it's known as the Schicksal Symphony, the Fate Symphony. Here, it's known simply as the 5th. In point of fact, the pastoral epithet originates from Beethoven himself, who entitled his work the Pastoral Symphony, or Recollections of Country Life. So, it's a bit of a cheat, but the important thing is the nickname stuck, and that should tell you something of interest about the piece. Next, the letter, F major. That signals the key of the piece. A composer has a choice of 24 keys, 12 major, 12 minor, a choice which immediately tells you something about the piece. Music in a major key tends to be harmonically stable and therefore generally positive, happy, solid, grounded. Pieces in minor keys tend to be less harmonically stable and consequently sadder, bluer. The choice of key can tell us more about the music. F major is a rather mellow key. As the subdominant C major, it lies harmonically below our tonic. Now that's a subject that requires yet another video, but suffice it to say, F major is a key with a grounded mellowness, quite appropriate for Beethoven's jaunt in the country. Individual keys can also mean certain things for certain composers, and that gives us additional information. When Beethoven wanted to say something really serious, he tended to pick C minor. And Mozart had more of a thing for D minor. Next, and finally, comes the letter number salad at the end. Now this is cataloguing stuff. Here, OP68 stands for opus, Latin work, 68, i.e. Beethoven's 68th catalogued piece. Now this is useful. Opus 1 was Beethoven's first work, which he deemed catalogable, back in 1795, and his final catalogued work, 31 years later, was the string quartet, Opus 135. So Beethoven's works run from Opus 1 to 135. Opus 68 sits pretty much in the middle of his life, so odds are this is a middle period work, and bingo, the Pastoral Symphony is mid-period Beethoven. Group hug everyone. Anyhow, this cataloguing system can vary. It works much better after Beethoven's time, with most composers using the opus system. But before Beethoven, well, those composers weren't cataloguing their work for posterity as they went along. So it was often the job of scholars and musical sleuths to do the cataloguing after a composer's death. Thomas Kuchel was the man who ended up cataloguing Mozart's works shortly after the composer's death, and Kuchel, or at least his initial K, has since become the cataloguing system itself. With Bach, it gets a bit more difficult. The catalogue system, BWV, well, that comes from the 1950s, and it sounds logical enough, only the system works by genre, not chronology, and even the genres, the sections aren't necessarily chronological. Anyway, there you go. What's in a title? Potentially, lots. See you next video. Please like and subscribe.
Oh, I do love Beethoven's Schicksal Symphony.
Oh yeah.
I never heard it. That is one of the rare few where everybody recognizes it for its number.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a lot of work.
The ninth is another one that, most people who listen to classical, if I say Beethoven's ninth, you don't have to say choral. They tend to know it just by the ninth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or they would just recognize it if you were to play it, and they would go, "Oh, that one, yeah."
Yeah. That's the other thing. Some of them won't even know the title or the number. They just know it when they hear it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Good stuff.
But it's interesting to see that they weren't really cataloging until Beethoven. I mean, Bach had so much work. I would imagine cataloging would have been important to him.
Mm-hmm. But again, at the time, it was more, those who were cataloging were more future proofing or future, thinking about the people in the future, looking back at the work and wanting to see where it fits. Whereas in the past, I guess up to that time, everyone was just, if they have a piece of work, they would come up with a title. This is the Sunny Day Sonata or whatever. They would come up with something. It didn't have to be following specific rules, but coming down with something as a standardized way of looking at it is good. But we stopped using it also. I mean, we don't do everything as opuses now, right? So it was specific for the time and for what was going on.
I'm considering going back to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great idea as far as knowing where something is in your catalog, but also you wouldn't start that on your third piece or your first piece or whatever. It's more when you're further into the process, right? You've got hundreds of pieces now. It's okay. You want to make sure you know where everything is, so you go back and redo it as a rename project or something.
Yeah,
but if you start out that way, you don't have to.
If I never gave some of my pieces some form of name, I'd have no way to associate them and remember them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you got a lot of pieces. That's the point.
Yeah.
That's what
I got some opuses.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was a twofer from @Enjoy Classical Music 6006. Awesome information. Love this channel for classical music. If you are becoming a classical music lover, go enjoy classical music there.
Yeah.
Great now stuff. we're coming back to Nari.
Nice, nice.
For the rest of the night, we are going to soak up her wisdom in a couple of different directions. She showed us how emotions play into classical music, but here she's going to talk a little bit about like why improvisation is tricky for people who are classically trained, and see what we've seen so far. It kind of makes sense because one thing we've heard with classical music is very structured, and it lends itself to structure in a way that when you're improvising, sometimes structure gets in your way.
Even with classical music, there's interpretation. So when you're playing classical music, there's what's on the paper, and if you just play it mechanically like it is on the paper, you're not really playing classical music. You should be interpreting it yourself. There's slight differences in timing and the way that the way that you emphasize notes, things like that are going to be your own interpretation of the song, but everything should be roughly structured like this. Like this is the song itself, so it should be identifiably like this.
Well, and a classical musician, say playing in an orchestra, who gets handed sheet music, never played the song before, might not even be familiar with the song.
Right.
They're looking at that sheet music and looking at the little highlights that say, play this way, play
in
that
that case,
way.
they want to very much be specific. Yes, very much robotic, or specific to what it says on the paper, because everybody else in the orchestra is counting on the timing of that. So that has to be right on for sure.
Now, can you imagine handing those same musicians sheet music and saying, we're going to play a jazz piece and improvise? Like some of those in the orchestra might have a tough time with that.
A lot of them would actually. If they had something to start with. If they had something to start with, you give them a nugget, like you give them a phrase to play, and then start with that, so that they all have somewhere to start, and then see what they all come up with. And again, different musicians will have different ways. There are, I'm sure, many classical musicians who are fantastic improvisers, but just from what I've seen, most who focus specifically on classical music never really explore the improvisational side, so they don't really know what they could play if they wanted to. Like you've seen them play blisteringly fast, complex pieces, so that the hands can do it. But if you told them to just do that, but do it your own way, they're just like, they might give you a blank look, like, do what?
And that's the same reason why you don't see a lot of orchestra musicians composing, writing. Like for some of them, it's very difficult.
Yeah,
they can play like masters, but trying to write a song is a different beast.
And even just looking at the way Nare was doing the major versus minor earlier, being able to translate a piece, like take a piece that is the way it is and change the entire way it sounds, change the entire mood of the piece just by changing those few key notes. That's a particular skill that's very good for demonstrating these differences, because it's important to understand how much difference just one little change can make. Like just changing one or two notes, to change something from major to minor, all of a sudden changes the entire feel of the whole thing.
Her ability to reproduce a composer the way she does is a beautiful skill.
Oh yeah, I look forward to it. It's coming up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the next couple after this you're going to see that skill in action.
Exactly.
But to start, we're gonna get to understand why improvisation can be a challenge for a classical composer.
Yep. Let's see what it is.
Why is it so difficult for classical musicians to improvise? Now, first of all, I'm not making a generalization and saying that all classical musicians are this way. This is definitely not the case, but I think it's still safe to say that most classical musicians that practice the music of the Western tradition, they have more difficulty with improvisation than musicians of other genres like blues, jazz, flamenco, folk, and so many others. Now, I am personally invested in this very question because I've struggled with quite a few things related to improvisation as a classically trained pianist and composer.
How can you follow all those cues, know what's going on based on the context and retain all of that information musically and be able to improvise over it.
Hey Nare, find something cool that you wrote, your thing, find a cool chunk that we can jam on. I'll find you, wherever you go, I'll find you.
Over the years, I've become a lot more comfortable with improvisation, yet I'm still a little hesitant to do it sometimes, especially in front of other people, and sometimes I just have this psychological barrier that I noticed against improvisation. Just last week, I was with a composer friend of mine who asked me to come over to his studio to help him brainstorm some ideas for a little bit of music for a picture. And because this type of thing is not very straightforward, we thought it would be best to improvise together using 2 keyboards. What I remember so distinctly about this very moment was that I was simultaneously very excited to do this and very reluctant to. I felt a little uncomfortable, self-conscious, a little shy.
Nope.
Of course, part of it was probably the fact that I haven't been around musicians like this or in a setting where I'm jamming with someone in a very long time. But still, I think there's something behind this that I want to explore a little further. An analogy that comes to mind is the difference between a very carefully and specifically crafted dialogue between 2 characters in a play and a conversation between 2 friends in real life. So of course there are some flaws in this comparison, but bear with me. Imagine a person that is only trained to recite Shakespearean monologues and dialogues, and they are a Shakespearean expert.
That am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass. I that am rudely stamped.
Even though this is absurd, just imagine them not speaking and communicating in any other manner other than Shakespearean language.
To all bear such as are of better person than myself.
Now, imagine this person being placed in a living room where there is a conversation happening between 2 people, and then they come over and they say, "Hey, how's it going?" This very moment is quite similar, in my opinion, to a classical musician going into, let's say, a jazz jam session, or any kind of jam session where there is a spot open for the classical musician to improvise. Now, even if what they're being asked to do is quite simple, just improvise on 1 chord or something like that, the musician can be quite stumped, just as you would imagine this Shakespearean person to be stumped. What am I supposed to say? How's it going? I know what that is, but I'm not trained, nor am I used to responding to that.
And cry content to that which grieves my heart, and wet my cheeks with artificial tears.
Another thing that comes to mind is that the typical classical musician is playing all this repertoire throughout their day. They're practicing masterworks, basically pieces that have survived centuries and are considered the top of its class. And so they're used to listening to and performing this sophisticated material. And now when they're trying to improvise, they have to go back to almost talking like a baby. They have to scale back and really start slow and start from a place that is not as sophisticated. Now at this point, similar to learning a new language, it's probably rough. You're probably struggling just to say a few simple things.
Je suis le voisin. Oh, all right. I'm sorry. Je suis Sam. D'Amérique. Oui, d'Amérique.
You mess up a lot. You feel a little insecure and confused.
Oui, tu joues... Non. Je joue avec des voitures.
Il joue aux petites voitures.
Because of this discomfort, I think a lot of classical musicians, like myself back in the day, don't feel this huge desire to go beyond that. Because in general, of course, we're not used to having people around us and inspiration around us that constantly remind us that there is something about improvisation that will deepen your musicianship. It will offer you a very different experience with expressing yourself and being in the moment with being spontaneous and creative, all of these different things, it's just not valued as much in classical music. So naturally, you just won't want to get over this discomfort. There's not as much incentive, and the job description also does not push us to do that. It's important to acknowledge that improvisation was actually a much bigger part of the classical music tradition back in the days of Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, Liszt, Debussy, up until, even 100 years or so ago. Gradually over time, this has changed. No longer are performers improvising their own preludes, interludes, cadenzas, full pieces on stage. Now, I think there are multiple factors as to why this has happened. Some of it include just the very fact that these pieces that composers were writing became much more complex with a lot more moving parts. Composers wanted to be more specific about what they were writing and what they wanted performers to replicate. And there was more of a separation between performers and composers. If you think about pieces like large symphonic works with many, many parts involved that are tightly woven together, it's not really practical to have people improvise there. And I think also over time, sections that were dedicated for improvised solos were also more specifically written out. And this, maybe it was because composers just wanted more control, or performers wanted to be a little more secure as classical concert tradition became more formal and the stakes became higher. I'm not really sure, but that just became a thing, or rather less of a thing. The point of this video is not to weigh the pros and cons of improvisation, but to just remind people out there who are classically trained and have experienced something similar to the things that I have. It's okay if you feel a little uncomfortable. Don't try to force it, and also just acknowledge the fact that that point of entry when you are getting started and when you're starting to practice improvisation, because that is a huge part of getting better. You improve little by little. That is the hardest part. There are a lot of layers to this as well. It's not something very straightforward, so it's okay if it's difficult, if it's confusing. Okay, now let's turn to my phone, where I'm gonna pull up some answers to an Instagram poll that I just put out. I asked, if you identify as a classical musician, do you improvise? And if not, what has been stopping you? Terrified, insecure, feel like I'm lacking the knowledge to step into that world. I enjoy practicing my normal classical music repertoire. Never found the need to. Am a massive jazz fan, but it's like speaking a foreign language I haven't mastered. Thinking about all the brilliant pieces I played, every improvisation feels like garbage. Fear of sounding stupid, clueless, unoriginal, cringeworthy. Fear of doing something ugly. Yes, I improvise a lot as an organist and Baroque continuist. All of the organists that I know personally are incredible improvisers. So it is alive and well. Not knowing enough harmony theory, not knowing where to start. I know too little music theory, and there are a lot of answers similar to this. I think a lot of people think that they need to know a ton about theory before they get started. Of course, knowing more theory helps, but it's not necessarily the case. No, I get discouraged because I don't know where to start, but I would like to start. When I improvise, I feel like it is the equivalent of a 3-year-old speaking. No exposure, space, and training to do it. Yes, I do. I always wanted to do it because I think that's a really good way to express yourself. When I studied classical music 8+ years, it was never an option that teachers allowed. Now I play jazz. No, even though I'm all for it. I think it's a fear of experimentation. So a lot of these are very similar to my experience. I want to know now in reverse. Let me know in the comments what you all think. Are you classically trained? And if so, did you experience something similar or not? I would love to know, and I think it would be great to just start a conversation here. Thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you very soon.
Man, it's hard to imagine her having a tough time with anything. She is so talented.
I mean, for sure. And I do get it though. And again, that was one that I come back to my dad again. And, he played for decades and played fantastically since he was a kid and was never a good improviser, never tried really to improvise at all. But when we would have a conversation, because when I'd started playing guitar and I would start to be able to just improvise something, I could just play something for him and he'd say, well, what was that? And I said, well, it was just part of this little scale, put together with whatever, and talking about how we could try to translate that to just be able to freely play on the piano, because it felt like he would have liked to improvise, but that he was in that bubble of classically trained musician where he had the papers and you would learn from the papers and you would listen to famous pianists who were performing the pieces in order to hear their translation of it, so that you could then have it in your ear, have it in your head, and then translate that from the paper as well. But the improvisation was never really part of it, and I always wished I could have been more used to him for improvisation. But he still he played piano to the day he died, basically, every day for 80 years basically.
Well, and that's not a bad answer. At least he wasn't like, "You're not my son." How dare you improvise?
Exactly. No, but he was kind of baffled as to how it came around. And really what it is, as she was saying, a lot of times it's, when they talk about it, the fear of sounding silly, the fear of making mistakes, the fact that everything that they've played so far are all these fantastic pieces that are so well structured and put together. So they're like, how do I do that on the fly? How do I come up with something that sounds that good right now that's different than anything I've played before? And that's a valid question. I mean, that's and that's why not everything sounds like a masterpiece when it just comes off your hands. But when I watch people, like, again, at an open jam, somebody who can just sit there and throw a guitar solo in any song because they can feel, they know what the changes are and they know what chords they should or should not be playing, they know certain riffs that they can grab and kind of block together like Lego blocks to make something sound good. Is it very active with doodle doodle doodle, or is it more hanging on one note like Gilmore style? Everybody has what is the song asking for is basically the question that I ask. And that's when people say oh, do a solo. I'm just like, yeah, I've been a bass player for so long, it's never really been my job to think about the solo. So there's a whole bunch of thought process that I would want to put into it first, and they're basically, their answer is don't think about it, just do it. You know what to play, just play. And it's like, well, telling me to let the music out from inside, it's not like you just open a little door and go, okay, here, and it's out.
It'd be nice if it worked that way.
It'd be nice, but a lot of it does come down to seeing the world through the eyes of a child, not being afraid to hear yourself make a bad note or a mistake. Ideally, not on stage in front of people. I mean, you're not trying. Well, ideally, you're not trying to do that. But
she hit the nail on the head for me when she said, her problem with improvising was more when she's playing in front of people.
Sure.
Because I'll sometimes noodle and try stuff I don't normally try when I'm playing in front of people. But when I am actually playing in front of even one person, I have this, I freeze up on the improving.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I totally get that. I mean, I felt the same way with keyboard forever. I mean, people would say, they would see me play, I could sit down at somebody's piano in their house and play a Chopin piece, for example. And they're like, oh, play something else. And it's like, I could play, I had a couple things that I could kind of pull out of the trick bag, but I didn't really have, I couldn't just sit there in the key of whatever and play whatever. I didn't have that going on at the time. Yeah. Now I just kind of fake it with pentatonics again, like I said.
One of the things she mentioned there that really interested me, I think it's more of a piano thing than, because she's not wrong about organists tend to have a different approach to the keys, and a lot of them, like she said, they're great improvisers. They're the ones who can play at sports games and go to the church and just play whatever that fits the mood.
And especially the ones with the foot pedals. To me, that's getting to that drummer level, using all four limbs at the same time and making something useful happen from there. Like having a bass line going with the feet, doom 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 doom, have something going down there while you have both hands doing something else all over the organ. That's crazy stuff when you get to that level of getting something grooving going on like that. And I've seen it, but it's good stuff.
I really like seeing her jam with others, and what that guy was saying, I'll find you. Do what you're doing. I'll find you. That can help a lot to overcome that fear of improvising in front of others. If you're lucky enough to get musicians like that you start to get comfortable with, they let you noodle and they find a way to encourage it.
Where some have the biggest problem is if it was two people, if it was us just sitting here trying to jam it out, and if you're sitting there and you're having difficulty trying to improvise, if I just said I'm just going to find you and you go, I could try to catch up to you, but then my playing could throw you off. And that's what happens a lot of times, where then you're, whether your timing slows down because you're trying to catch me or trying to slow down to me, like not us particularly, but I'm saying two people in general.
Yeah, well, somebody has to lead and somebody has to accompany. If the only way having multiple leaders in music works is if they're very synchronized in like their style, their approach. Like you can get two guitars that work great together. Def Leppard, great example of it. Iron Maiden. It's possible to have two guitars who do totally different things, but they do them in a synchronized fashion. But if you've got different soloists who aren't comfortable with each other, or they want to go in different directions, they want to do different things, it starts to become that noise she was talking about. Like the whole reason why a lot of the classical composers, it's hard to improvise in some of that is because there's already so much going on that trying to throw another line in that's improvising when you've already got 10 parts doesn't work.
Yeah, no. And that's where improvisation would be more, again, for an empty or new structure. And that's where, like, a lot of times when we try to put down tracks, that sometimes when I go to the recording studios, we're just trying to get down like a bass track. We're not trying to have like the solo in there, maybe not the perfect words yet, but we're just trying to get like a structure idea. Like, oh, somebody had the idea for this kind of a groove with, this kind of a, chord rotation going on, and then we start just putting that into a thing. And it could be a verse that's going to eventually be a verse of a song, but we'll just play the same thing around and around for a couple minutes just to kind of get a feel for
get in the groove.
To get the groove going, try different things out, see how things sound together. If you want to, throw a solo in somewhere, but the idea isn't to try to get the final product out right now, but more to get ideas down that work in that style, so that later on when we listen back to it, we go, oh yeah, that song, and we can immediately jump back into it, because now we've got it recorded there, and being able to go back to what we did already is very easy. Because if I was the one who played it the first time, if I'm hearing it, I can sure as heck do it right now. It's like I can hear it, I can remind myself how it went, and just immediately jump onto it. So that makes it easier to be able to just, have things recorded as a reminder. So you can even just have one big file where you have, a chunk of this song, a chunk of that song, a chunk of this song, so that you could give yourself something as a kickstart to get you going into that groove. If you have difficulty just, coming up with something off the bat.
Yeah, if you're new to like improvising, like I kind of am, I think the best approach is to just get a few, if not like one basic instrument that you're going to start, like get a good drum beat or something, throw a bass in there. That would be enough for me to start working with it. If you add guitar and other parts, improvising gets tougher and tougher as you start to get multiple layers. So start like with the basic layers. And
I would actually go with something like a jam track, like just for practice purposes. I would start with something like, you can go online, you find a million jam tracks out there, and the jam track, the idea is that it's the structure of the song. It's everything except the solo. So like, here's a nice chord progression, and it just keeps going around and around, and, it might build, and like, it might show you on screen what the chords are coming up or what scale you should be using for, this section of the song. So it kind of guides you through it. But those are hugely helpful for learning how to solo, learning what you need to play, because those are just a song without the solo or the vocals, and the whole thing just keeps going for you. So you can be playing the vocal line or the melody, or just making up your own stuff over top of something that is a fully structured song. If you just start from drums, it kind of gets some people to get overwhelmed, where they're just like, okay, and now what? Like, when they start hitting a note, and like, okay, now what? Like, they don't know what should be next. And I get that. If you don't know what to play, sometimes you get, you're frozen and you don't play anything. Whereas, to me, it's like, explore, just start playing things and see what sounds good and what doesn't.
Yeah. If you're lucky enough to have one of those arranger keyboards that we looked at last week, those arranger keyboards are great for practicing improv on top of, because they'll come with like different styles, and you got some drums, you got some bass, a little bit of like rhythm going on, and an arranger keyboard will let you practice all night.
And even this, little Casio that I have over here, just by putting it into a Casio chord mode with the bottom, quarter of the keyboard, I can just do chords, so that if I wanted to play along, instead of having to, it's a cheat way. So instead of having to use all three fingers to hold a chord for things, I can just, for a D chord, I can just hit one note and I get a full chord. If I wanted A minor, you just have to hit a note and then a second note, and it'll give you something like that. Depends on what you're trying to do. but it makes it easy to kind of go around with, like you said, just figuring out a chord progression. You can kind of work it around that way, and then it's easier because you're only hitting one note or two notes with the left hand, and you can then use the right hand to do everything, to get a melody or little chords or whatever.
Yeah, and if you don't have an arranger keyboard, a product that I used way back when, Band in the Box. That is an awesome piece of software for just like setting up a groove and then go nuts on top of it.
Exactly. Same idea. Basically that was a jam track in a box that you could, programmable jam track in a box.
Yeah, it's still out there, probably as popular as it ever has been. I still see a ton of people that like swear by Band in the Box. It's been around for a long, long time.
I was gonna say probably the mid 2000s. At one point I was working in New York City, and one of the guys I worked with, he would say that, he would be playing with that, jamming in the basement with that, and he would, leave it running and come upstairs, and, his wife would hear the door, door opens and hear the music, and he'd look down and be like, "Oh, keep playing, guys. I'll be back in a minute." And then, go on, there's a whole band down there, just there's in a little box. That's all.
Shit. I was using it back in the mid 90s. It's that old.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he'd been using it for a long time at that point, but he was a jazz guy. So like when we went to a guitar store the one time, grabs a guitar. He was a lefty also, so not a lot in the store for him, but went to the store anyway just to check it out. Grabs a lefty guitar off the wall, starts playing, and he's like, "Yeah, whenever I pick something up, it just sounds jazzy," because he's a jazz player, and it was true. Like he just picked it up and just started noodling something, and it immediately sounded like jazz. Whereas if I picked something up at that point, it was basically sounding like a very simple blues bass line, because at that point I was just getting, I don't think I'd even gotten my guitar or my bass yet. So those, I think I bought them in 2009, 2010. So
well, you tend to get a like Grateful Dead sound.
yeah, sort of. Try to stay on the pentatonics. Usually I keep it kind of simple on the pentatonics and go from there. And like I said, make it more fancy as we go along. I'm starting to figure out, spots where I can put things in there to make it sound a little fancier, so that it's not just a pentatonic run. But at the same time, a lot of times I don't need to solo a lot because I'm usually playing bass. So and when I do grab the guitar now, I'm just trying to fit rhythm and trying to do little things like Bob Weir would do in the Grateful Dead, because you got Bob and Jerry on the two guitars. Someone's doing more of a solo, and someone's either hitting chords, but they're not just hitting block chords. A lot of times they're hitting a little phrase or a little lick or a little riff. And that's where you get, getting those into my vocabulary, so that it doesn't sound like I'm just hammering the same chords out all the time, so that the rhythm guitar sounds like I'm actually doing things.
And you've actually like tried to duplicate different musicians. You've shown me some videos of the guitar guy that like shows how to play in the style of like Jerry Garcia or simulating a musician's techniques and style, which is what we're going to be looking at next here is, Nari. If she has a problem with improvising, she has definitely overcome it, because a lot of what she does here, to me, is improvising, in the sense that you're trying to play the same piece in different styles, in different musician styles.
In this case, I think she would equate it more to composing than improvising, because improvising would be if we just told her on the spot to do any of these, and it would be a little difficult to try to hammer it, to shoehorn in all the different style qualities that you need to for each individual composer. Like you want it to sound specifically like this guy, but not like the rest of the guys. You have to make sure it has this, but not too much of that. So there's a lot of thought that had to go into making this. But so I think she would consider it more like composing, where she's actually, or composing or arranging, trying to figure out the way to make it fit the person's style while still staying identifiably the song that we're looking at.
See, I would consider it a form of improvising style,
coming up with it for sure.
Technique.
Coming up with all the each of the things together, that's an improvisation. But being able to do it on the spot as right out of nowhere would be one thing. Being able to put it together and put some it took a lot of thought, is all I'm saying, to put it all together. I'm trying not to minimize that.
Without a doubt, she could not have done some of these without getting intimate with the piece originally, right. And then knowing because she's so good at understanding the composers and what makes them who they are, it makes it a little easier for her to incorporate their techniques and their style into the improving.
Exactly. And we're
So-
going to look at Autumn Leaves in this one.
Yeah, and done in 10 composers, and some of these are some big names, and others that are new to me.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And let's see. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to enjoy all of them.
Yeah, I've gotten much more familiar with Autumn Leaves since her first video, and this is a piece I want to get good at. And
Oh yeah,
this
Matter of fact-
hopefully inspires me to really get that good with this piece.
One of the tabs I have is for Autumn Leaves on bass, where you're basically playing it as a solo piece on bass. So you're actually doing like the little bass line and little chords here and there. So I'm going to look at that later too. It's not really full chords. I think it's all just, little 2-note chords, possibly, some 3-note chords, but it basically gets the full flavor of the song across when you do it right. Cause it was probably Scott's Bass Lessons or wherever, or, I got it from there. But it was one of those that I'll have to go back and revisit, because that was one that I could just, while I'm tuning up at, at a gig or something, just pull a little bit of that out, and somebody be like, oh no.
Yeah. And this is a piece that we've seen multiple channels suggest as like, this is one you should know.
Yeah, exactly. So here we go. Autumn Leaves in the style of 10 classical composers.
My name is Nari Sol, and not too long ago I put out a video of myself playing Autumn Leaves in the styles of 10 different classical composers. Since then, many of you let me know that I left out some of your favorite composers. And so today I am back about to tackle these 10. This set feels very different to me for some reason. You all will let me know your thoughts in the comments. But anyhow, I did my best. I hope you enjoy it. And like last time, I'm going to first play the tune in a very simple form and then proceed from there. Thank you so much for listening. If you are interested in the PDF of both this set and the last one, they will be available on my website and to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much again, and I will see you soon.
Oh, jazz hands. Jazz hands.
Awesome.
When she was doing the Satie one, I was like, I'm surprised Satie didn't go Dorian. But instead, he went augmented second and diminished ninth. So again, like she picks up on some of the nuances of the composers and what they might do a little different.
And to think that all of those were, the same structure, essentially the same thing on paper as far as the song goes when she started, and just made them all into such different speeds and, again, so much space in one, and so, so many notes crammed into another one, just because of their styles, the way that they actually write. Very cool.
I really felt like I was listening to different pieces there. Like eventually, like the song faded away and the composer was what I was hearing in the variation.
Exactly.
And
being able to see the interpretation that she does. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yes, those little pop-ups, that's so educational when you're seeing it on the fly. Oh, not enough room for trills, and those composers, some of them like their trills.
And the hand crossovers and the lower register rumble and all that kind of stuff, like using those techniques to make sure to get that signature sound for those composers, and just be able to, you see them as they happen, you recognize them immediately, and there are things that would help you to recognize those composers in the future. If you watch those Fugue a couple times, you'd be in a great spot to be able to see even what something is similar to, even if it's not the right composer. You'd say, oh, that's that's similar to the way that whoever, like oh, it sounds like Rachmaninoff, but it was somebody else. And, you could see the different aspects of the different composers.
Yeah, she put a lot of time and thought and analysis into producing that. That's incredible learning tool for me. Like I feel inspired. I think I can be some of those composers in technique.
Exactly. Exactly. And being able to look through those lenses, be able to see a piece and think about them in the style of a certain composer, even just as a starting point. Like you might not want it to sound completely like that person the whole way, but you're like, oh, I want it to start off kind of like Beethoven or whatever. Like you have
Yeah,
an
yeah,
idea in
yeah.
mind.
I want to understand what makes Beethoven Beethoven. I
Mhm.
don't necessarily want to write a piece exactly like him, but I want to know why his music feels the way it does.
Exactly. And that's one of those places that it's great. There's one song, just as a side note. It's a blues thing, but it's a song by one of the blues guys that goes through all the keys, like all 12 keys in one song. So it's like a long song, but the idea is that as he plays through each key, he plays in the style of different guitar guys. So in one song, you get 12 different guitar styles as he goes through, and he just talks a little bit about who the person is, and then just goes into like their style of playing, so you can get an identifiable grasp on how a solo would sound from this person versus this person, down the line for 12 different people. So very cool. I'll figure out. I'll find the name of the song in a little bit. I want to say it's like on the album Guitar Grooverama by Duke Robillard, I want to say. And I think that's the song name also, Duke, or the Guitar Grooverama. I'll have to find it later. We'll listen to it later and check it
That
out.
sounds like a rock and roller, Duke.
Duke, yeah. Blues guy, old blues guy.
That was an awesome example of variating a piece to different composers. And for our last two, we're going to look at two composers that are close to our hearts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chopin,
Mm-hmm.
definitely being one of them.
Yep.
And I am really interested to see like her interpretation of Chopin's technique and how she sees Chopin as a composer.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So let's check it out. How to sound like a Chopin.
It's the waltz edition.
Nice.
I would record just her piano hits and turn them into drums.
Exactly. She could finger drum like crazy.
Which I think she did at one point. I think there's one video in her library where she takes, I think it was Chopin too, and she feeds it into a drum, a drum machine.
Take that MIDI and use it.
Yeah, I was like, oh, damn, I got to try that.
Exactly. Get some crazy drum out of that.
Watching her fingers in action just inspires me.
Indeed. Indeed.
And I do feel like she's channeling Chopin there.
Exactly.
Oh, and you got your happy birthday.
Yeah, exactly. With the little hat on and everything. Now we do have one more style to cover.
Yes, and this one is, I guess I would say my favorite composer. I mean, I do love Beethoven. He was the reason why I got into piano. But get off my Bach.
Exactly.
Bach is definitely the one that really got me writing more so. Learning more musical techniques, like understanding the fugue, was important to me.
Yeah, for sure. And as a style, I really do like the fugue also.
Well, after we get done with this one, I did manage to dig up that little fugue that we heard earlier, and we'll finish off with a heavy metal rendition that I did of the little fugue. One of my favorite pieces of all time.
Very cool. But first, how do we sound? Like Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Nari Sol. I'm a pianist composer, and today we're going to go over some ways to sound like J.S. Bach. First off, we're going to choose a motive. Let's actually make that a little more straightforward. Once we identify our key center, we're going to get familiar with 4-part harmony. With this in mind, we're going to favor polyphony over homophony. In other words, multiple lines make up the harmony rather than having chords that accompany the melody. Next, avoid parallel fifths and octaves. Get familiar with suspensions. Use sequences. Stick with an organized grid-like rhythm. Use fragments of the motive. Especially to have imitations between the lines. Embrace dissonance and chromaticism. Add ornaments to taste. And now put it all together. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.
Oh, I'm shook too, Johann.
Always a pleasure.
Again, the little pop-up descriptions make it so much easier for me to understand what's going on there and what to focus on trying to play that kind of technique.
Yeah. And it's not about, figuring out exactly what notes she's playing at exactly what moments. She's telling you the ideas behind why she chose those things, and you're hearing what they sound like. So you're getting the ideas in of, oh, that's because of this as you're hearing it. So you're kind of locking those together, and that works out nicely to, try to internalize all those different aspects of one composer. So I would just watch one of those on repeat for a little bit, get that kind of in your ear and in, the match between in your ear and in your head, and then, try it out. Take a simple, progression and try to make it sound like something like that.
Yeah, and avoid parallel fifths and octaves, which I was like, damn, that's my jam.
You're out.
Bach,
strike one, strike two, strike three, you're out.
I'm going to get that little buzzer noise.
We'll get one just for you.
Actually, those noises would work good when I'm practicing. Like if I did something wrong and I heard that noise, I'd probably program my brain a lot faster.
French horn. Low F.
So we got to give Nari a special thanks for our first classical night, not our last, but she really, this channel, if you love classical music or if you just love music, you will love this channel.
Absolutely. And again, the technique always amazes me. Just, watching her hands go and hearing what you're hearing at the same time. It's like, wow. It looks like the hands just kind of float over. It's like, I remember when I used to play like that. It's like, no, I never used to play like that.
Seeing her play inspires me to get better.
Exactly.
Like that is the level I would hope to reach someday.
And again, it comes down to the vocabulary too. Like that's where I think, especially her explorations into other musical styles, like one of her videos was, bebop digested by a classical musician, that kind of a thing, where she's diving into a style that might be unfamiliar to her, but just trying to dive into it and digest it the way that she did, the way she broke down the different composers, classical composers, see what makes the music that style, and then try to write an original piece in that style as part of what she's doing there. Hi, Tony.
Oh, Big Tony.
Yeah, there you go. It works.
Yeah, I wanted to just switch this because I'm going to need to share audio for this one. And I found the little fugue that we were listening to earlier. And I'll get the share sound. So I'm going to have to mute when I bring this onto the stage. Otherwise, I will get an echo.
You got it. No echo for you. No echo for you. Nice.
Okay, safe for me to unmute.
Very cool. Very cool. I like the interpretation.
Well, I wanted it to. I want to hear classical music in metal. Like,
Absolutely.
that's always been the bridge that I'm trying to form. There is classical music and metal go, to me, hand in hand.
Sure. And that's where you'll also be using your going to use some Phrygian mode, and some Aeolian, some minor, some Phrygian, using both of those. That'll get you a metal sound for sure.
Well, and what's nice with using guitars, in that particular case, the way a fugue is designed with the different guitars, you can really hear that melody as it gets played across the different instruments and layers, and where the repetition, the round approach,
Sure. Yeah.
of the fugue comes in.
Yeah, whether it's kind of a call and answer, whether it's rounds, exactly. You get that same familiar nugget that reappears throughout. I like that.
Yeah. The next one, I've got a Mozart piece that I've been dying to do since I was 12, and I think it's Einklein Nacht music, a little night music.
Yeah. Good one.
Yeah, it's on my bucket list.
Well, we'll have to see how you progress on that over the coming month. You should definitely put it on the list. Definitely knock it out.
Classical. Oh, the list. That's what Uni was talking
Put it
about.
on the list.
I'll put it on my list.
Exactly. Sort of like Queen. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. When Classical Night 2, I will get that ready for the sequel.
Nice. But we do thank everybody for joining us for Classical Night 1. We'll do it again for sure.
Yeah, this one was a long time in coming. So glad we got it out.
Yep. Join us all again tomorrow and next week. Come on back around.
Yep, we'll be here with DJ Tatius, Band Lab and Coffee, and I think Ange actually has a surprise list for afterwards.
Nice.
Again with the lists.
Again. It's a theme for tonight, for sure.
We'll be Bach.
Yeah, we'll be Bach. That too. All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming around. And again, we'll be back with more classical another time. We'll be back with more everything another time, with more music on Talking Shhh I.T. with Glenn and Tony. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye. Ambient noise, yeah.
So now you're grabbing some Band Lab clips.
Now, for me, that would also be something where I would use like volume automation and like bring that from the bottom, like bring it in and then bring it back out.
And these are the kinds of sounds you can stretch. With this AI, like stretching it actually can be cool.
Oh, that was perfect for the interlude too.
Ends it right in the right
I didn't
spot.
even notice 40. I didn't even realize the texture faded out at the interlude until it happened. I'm like, wait a minute.
Sometimes it was just meant to be that way.